All right, we are recording. So thank you everyone for being here. This is our sustainability careers and pathways series. So this panel is on sustainability and policy and law. My name is Tor Johnson. I'm the event planning and outreach intern in the Morris Office of Sustainability. Super excited to have you all here today. So real quick before we get started, I just want to do some quick intros of our panelists. So if you guys want to share your name, pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing those, your Morris grad year and majors and minors, your current job title, and then how your work relates to sustainability and policy and law. And I can repeat any of that if it's a lot to remember. So yeah, who wants to go first? We've been doing an oldest to youngest thing in our previous panels, so.
How dare you? Uh, so I'm not going to remember all the things you asked me to say, but my name is Bennett Smith. Pronouns are he, him, his. I graduated from Morris in 2010. Um, I was a political science major with an emphasis in international relations and Latin American area. Uh, Latin America was involved somehow. I wasn't a Latin American area major, or Latin American studies major, but I worked at the legislature for most of the last 10 years. And in February of 2023, I moved to a government relations firm, Fredrikson and Byron, to become a lobbyist. And what were the other things, Tor, that you asked us to say?
I think you got it all actually, so that was
Okay, good.
perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Matt Privratsky, he, him pronouns, graduated in 2011, which if you want to know my precise placement in Morris lore, I was there when Roger had to give a presentation and we had to review him, and clearly he did well because all of us said, yeah, hire this guy. So Roger started the time when I was there. Right now, I'm the director of government affairs for Nokomis Energy, which is a solar company based in the Twin Cities. I've previously worked at the Capitol with Bennett. I've worked for Fresh Energy, which is an energy policy nonprofit. I've worked in local government, but right now we're sort of neck deep in distributed solar. So even within solar, a more narrow field. So if people want to really nerd out on interconnection challenges, I'm your guy. But happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruby DeBellis, she, her pronouns, graduated from Morris in 2018. And I worked for Senator Amy Klobuchar for 5 years in various roles, but the most recent one was outreach director, and one of my issue areas was energy and environment. And then while I was with her, I got my master's in science, technology, and environmental policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And now I work at Tunheim, which is a strategic communications firm, as a senior account strategist. And so I am mostly, it's kind of hard to describe my job. I'm not a lobbyist, but I work with lobbyists on behalf of grantees in the energy space. So I work with Fresh Energy and other organizations like them to, on their communications, and so help draft messaging, ghostwrite op-eds for them, and kind of just do a bunch of behind the scenes stuff in terms of communications for in the public affairs space. So yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. For those of you who are just joining, I just want to say real quick, if you don't want your face in the recording for the YouTube channel, go ahead, turn your video off so it won't be on the YouTube channel. Yeah, and so our next question then is, did you always know what you wanted to do? And then how did you choose your major and or your career?
I still don't know what I want to do, and I let the universe guide me and all my career choices. So just take that with a grain of salt. I think I did know when I graduated from Morris that I wanted to do something that had like you know a societal impact that was personally rewarding, that you felt like you were doing something good. I wanted to do something that interested me and also helped people, just, you know, in a general sense. And I think when I saw that question that you sent out, Tor, I what I was thinking most about was that the thing that I've leaned on most is finding mentors in my, you know, whatever space I'm in. When I was at Morris, like, I had good faculty advisors and good community members, and I really leaned on them to help me kind of sort through all of the things that I was interested in, that I was involved in, because I had a lot of interest, was involved in a lot of organizations, but yeah, I really leaned on them to kind of help provide suggestions, guide me, and then, you know, based on what they provided, I was like, well, of all these things, this is what sounds most interesting for me right now. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
I love that the start of your answer was like the hippiest thing of all time. But I definitely didn't always know like precisely what I wanted to do. When I went to Morris, I chose it. I got super lucky. I chose Morris just because I wanted to play soccer. And then I joked before a lot of you got here, it turns out they recruited actual soccer players too. And Morris ended up being an absolutely perfect fit for me. You know, I did all the stuff that all of you guys do, you know, all the do whatever you want, because you could do any activity, any musical thing, theater thing, sport thing, student government thing. So I started majoring in communications because I just sort of thought I would maybe like working in TV or media. And I still ended up with a communications minor and did a lot of work with Barbara Burke, who was a fantastic, you know, supportive, unofficial advisor for me once I switched to political science. I used to give a lot of tours, and I used to tell students all the time, I actually think it's a really good idea to just, especially at a liberal arts school, the first semester, just choose classes you're interested in without worrying necessarily about the major. I mean, if you know your major, go for your major. But I think, like, for instance, I just took 2 political science classes because I thought they'd be interesting. And then I was like, oh, duh, I found 2 classes interesting. Shockingly, I think it'd be good for me to major in this. So I think in terms of like the career after Morris, to be honest, I still didn't know precisely what I wanted to do when I graduated, in part because I graduated during the recession. I applied for, I think, maybe 170 jobs for real. And back then I was still getting rejection letters, which makes me sound 100 years old, but believe it or not, I was getting rejection letters in 2011. But the overlap with Bennett, I would say, is I think it's okay to do a job knowing you won't do it for 15 years or 10 years. I think it's okay to take a job knowing that you are giving yourself into it and you're investing in it, but it's not your whole, it doesn't have to be your entire career. And so I think figuring out, like when I did internships or whatever, and I know that's another question, but even with jobs, I found jobs and internships to be as much about figuring out what you like a little less and don't want to do as much as what you want to do. Because to be honest with you, in sustainability and politics and government and regulation, you know, there's like 7 ways you can work in that space. There's like 50 different levels you can work in that space. It's sort of like, you're not to pretend that you would know right away. It's just sort of funny. So I didn't really know, but I haven't found that to be too big of a challenge.
So I'm realizing I forgot to say what I majored in. Surprise, political science, but biochemistry, which was my original major at Morris, and I did not switch to poli-sci until my junior year, which is pretty late in the game. But yeah, a lot like what other people have said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really liked science, but another good reason to explore is because I did a summer internship in science and chemistry, and then I realized I don't want to do this, which is great to have that realization at 18 and not at 38. So I, switched gears. I had a really influential summer program at the Humphrey School called PPIA, the Public Policy International Affairs Junior Summer Institute, and that really helped explain to me what grad school is all about, what public policy is, and so that really helped lay the groundwork for what was to come next. And then very serendipitously, I was class speaker in 2018, and Senator Klobuchar was commencement speaker, and that's how we met. And I got hired at her office after that. So, you know, I know that's not the average route, but definitely, you know, I think just taking things as they come is a lot of, you know, post grad life. And so I ended up working for her for 5 years. And very similar to other people, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just had this vague, like, public service sense, didn't know how to cultivate that. And so, as you know, kept going in my career, that's when I was like, you know, I think I want to go back to school, want to do public policy. But then, you know, wanted to fold in my biochemistry background. And that's why I decided to do a specific science, technology, environmental policy degree. And that's really what kind of shifted my perspective. And then even knowing I wanted to do that, I wasn't sure within the program what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be more in the transportation infrastructure type stuff. And then once I was in the program, realized I was more into environmental justice and housing and that intersection. And so every step of the way, I'm still figuring it out. And this new job for me, I just started in November, is still, you know, it feels like a step in this path of my career, but one that I could not have predicted a year ago. And most people who work for Tunheim are actually, you know, communications and marketing people who went to school for communications. And I'm just a policy person who has communications experience, you know, so there's so many different ways that you can gain the skills that you need in this space. And so, yeah, I would say career is just constantly winding and you never know who you're going to meet. It's all about, especially in the policy space, opportunities of meeting people through, you know, different events and things like that in grad school. It does definitely another reason, another thing that kind of helped connect the dots there. But yeah.
Thank you guys. I think it's really interesting. This is my last panel that I'm doing in this internship. I've done a lot of them. Not a single person has said they know exactly what they want to do coming into college. So I think that's a little bit of a stress reliever for our students, including me. So yeah, our next question is, did you participate in any research, internships, or jobs to help you prepare for your career?
I'm trying to think back, and I know I did. It was a while ago. I will say, like, as far as being a poli-sci major at Morris, the thing that I got most interested in was the campaign aspect of political science. So like that was 06, 08, not really 2010. Well, it sort of. I graduated in May of 2010, but like I
not really 2010. Bennett ran for the House in 2010.
But I wasn't a student. I wasn't a student.
But not much campaign work that year.
Yeah, did a lot of campaign work that year. And back to like having good people in your life and good mentors. Tom McRoberts, who used to be an advisor at UMM, he the reason I didn't have time for internships and research projects was because I was waiting tables. And so he was like a regular customer of mine and always wanted to like talk about like the politics of the week when he'd come in for his 1 cup of tomato soup on Friday night. And during one of those conversations, he was like, you know, you should run for the legislature. And it was like the most out of the blue, like unexpected thing. And I thought he was just nuts for like probably about a month. And then he like kept saying it. And I was involved in like going to caucuses, going to the county convention, going to the Senate district convention, like really involved in like the DFL party process and just kind of like learning about all the pieces of that. And yeah, then finally around like graduation time in May, sort of like Ruby, I was like the class speaker, and that was right about the same time that I decided I was going to do that. Right after commencement, I was like, okay, I'm going to run for legislature, and it was a great experience and opened the door to a bunch of other things. Matt walked in some parades for me. He uh, got a lot of my student friends to help out, but yeah, the thing that stands out to me most in terms of like research and internships, honestly, is Paula Laughlin's voting behavior class that I took in the fall of '08, and doing exit polling for that class and analyzing how people who lived in Morris were thinking about making their voting choices, and doing like the analysis of that, and then I did do actually an internship right after graduation in the spring semester of 2011. I applied to be an internship at Amy Klobuchar's Minneapolis office, and that was a great experience for a semester. And then I became a staff assistant for a year at her office after that. So, yeah, I did research and internships.
To sum up, yeah, I made some of the worst campaign lit of all time for Bennett in that campaign. If we looked at it again, we would light it on fire. I did research and internships during school. Back then, social media and YouTube were new enough that my research was on how YouTube and social media impacted mainstream news coverage, which was by random chance very salient today. But it's was just because it was what I was interested in. But I can't remember the names of all the programs, but I got one grant through that with Paula Locken was my advisor, and I worked with her on that. And then presented it in Chicago, like the Midwest thing that students go to all the time. And then I did an internship in DC. I'm a twin, and we both went to Morris, and we interned in 2009 at the same time in DC. I interned at the Library of Congress in the Congressional Relations Office, which I think is still a Morris held thing, maybe not. And then sometimes, and my brother did an internship at Lockridge Grindle Noun, which used to be sort of a Morris mainstay as well. I, to be honest, found it really interesting to work on the Hill. Found it interesting I'm from a town of 1,000 people and went to college in Morris. So living in DC was, spoiler alert, different. I enjoyed it, but it also helped me learn that I was more interested in working at the state level or working in Minnesota. So I don't regret it. Like, I have no negative thoughts of it other than the time I got mugged because I was irresponsibly not getting home correctly. But otherwise, honestly, like, I'm glad I went there because I think internship should, as I said before, should be about figuring out what you like to do and even what you don't like to do. And it was a great experience. Yeah, so I think all of that help prepare me. I think the research, to be honest, combined with the sheer amount of writing I had to do in the classes. So similar to what Ruby mentioned, I actually started on the communication side and then moved into the policy side. And so I still do like an unbelievable amount of writing for my work. There were times where I was just like puking out content like nonstop. When I worked at the House, I worked for 15 lawmakers, including the one that represented Morris, and you're just like puking out press releases. I mean, like, the sheer amount of writing is just insane. It's like the best boot camp ever. And almost all my writing skills actually came from the sheer amount of writing you did in the small class size, like, classes at Morris, like the 3-page papers, 5-page papers, the drafts, all the classes I did with Sherry Breen, where she just makes you learn how to draft. She's teaching you the ins and outs of, like, not just like synthesizing and writing, but like, how do you iterate? How do you get better? All the papers I did in Rogers, like local government class or whatever, like you're just sort of going through so much. I remember my final paper that I did for Sun Shoes, international relations class. It helps you get those chops, and not everyone does writing for their work, to be honest, but someone like me that does it all the time. In high school, like, I never cared about writing or like as a task. Like, it always seemed like a task for task's sake. And then when I had to do it about subject matter I cared about, it helped me learn how to do it because I cared about the thing I was writing about versus just like writing about a book they chose. You're writing about topics you chose. So yeah, that helped a lot.
Yeah, so I did mention I did some chemistry related internships, and which helped me decide that I didn't want to be a chemistry professor, but they also equipped me with a lot of good technical writing skills that do still come in handy now. And lots of different kinds of writing, persuasive writing, passive voice, like reporting in scientific terms. And also a lot of what I do now is reading really dense reports and then like translating them into layman's terms. And so I think Morris definitely helped prepare me to do that. As far as internships go, so I mentioned my summer program, PPIA. We had a capstone project, and mine was about the opioid crisis. And so that was before my senior year of Morris. And so my senior year of Morris, I had an independent study where I continued on that. And so I was able to do that for credit and make that a more comprehensive report. And then I also, my senior year, had internship with the city of Morris, where I wrote their first ever communications policy, which was adopted 1 week before I graduated college. So that was awesome. And I believe laid the groundwork for a digital internship, which I don't know if that still exists or not, but, telling Morris how to, what the best practices for, using their Facebook page and who's the spokesperson for the city. And little did I know that is super relevant to my work today. And so, yeah. And then then I was on the other side of internships. And so it's funny, Bennett mentioned he was an intern for Senator Klobuchar's office. I was the intern coordinator for Senator Klobuchar's office for almost 3 years. And so I also had experience, hiring and training interns, which I think was a huge part of my job that I really enjoyed. And so, also learning how to like be a people manager. And I don't know if this is going to come up in other questions. I don't think it is specifically about clubs and such, but I do want to say, despite all of the content in our classes being wonderful, I also would say being in MCSA, student government, and like mock trial prepared me a lot for the workforce. And a lot of what I do now is run meetings. And so where did I learn how to run a meeting and make an agenda? MCSA. So, there are definitely things in addition to the research and internships and jobs I've had. I would say my extra and co-curricular activities is huge groundwork for a lot of the stuff I do today. So those are also, they're fun, but they're also useful. So yeah.
So thank you guys. Our next question is, what did you do right after graduation? Did you attend graduate school or jump into a career? What was your first career plan and job out of college, and how did you find these opportunities? So little roadmap of your career path after graduation.
So I kind of already covered a little bit of that. Right after graduation, I jumped right into the 6 months you have before you have to start paying student loans. I used to burn up all of my personal savings to run for the legislature. But it was really fun. It was really informative. I learned a lot, met a ton of people. And that really did open the door to like that internship with Senator Klobuchar, joining her staff. And then after I'd been there for a year, I used my vacation time the next summer to go back and help the person who was running in the seat I had ran in around Morris. And he actually ended up winning. His name was Jay McNamer. That was in 2012. And so using that connection, I went to go work at the legislature. He, put in a good word for me with the new speaker. I became a committee legislative assistant for a early childhood committee at the House at that time. And then from there, I went to the media department. After a year, I tried working in DFL Media. I was there for about 5 years with Matt for a little bit. And then during the Trump era, when I was state representative Ilhan Omar's media writer, I got pretty burnt out on working in media and just really couldn't stomach consuming 24-hour news media anymore. So I moved to the research department in the House DFL caucus, which was kind of away from angry constituent calls, away from having to consume media, just like really focusing on the policy and how the mechanics of a committee run. So then I worked on higher ed, agriculture, and industrial education and economic development, which is a fancy committee name for the broadband committee, more or less. Broadband and disaster relief funding. So what it has to do with industrial education, I'm not sure. And then that led me into this role at Fredrikson I'm in as a lobbyist now. They were looking to build out the government relations services that they provide to egg industry business clients. And with my 5 years as a researcher on the House Egg Committee, they thought that would be really useful in how they help serve folks that they have as egg clients. And yeah, it's been good. So I didn't go to grad school. I don't have a master's degree. I didn't pursue that. I think it's really helpful for some people. For me, I kind of felt like with each step I was taking, trying out different roles, I was really learning a lot and kind of maxing myself out mentally a little bit sometimes in certain roles. And so I've never like felt the itch to go get the master's degree, but I know it's like perfect for some people. And if you know the economy's slow and you're looking to burn some time and add more credentials to your resume to make yourself appealing, great. I didn't do that, but I do feel like each one of those steps was kind of like building and adding a layer onto that like career, your appeal to like a future employer too. So anyway.
Yeah, I would so I started as a news director at the radio station, not KUMN, but the radio station in Morris. So I was covering like school board, county board, and school district, which was unbelievably entertaining and not incredibly lucrative, as the news business tends not to be. So similar to Bennett, when my loans were about to kick in, I sort of had to find another job so as to be able to afford to eat. So then I did like video production and marketing for a company in Alexandria that your aunts might be fans of, Tastefully Simple. And then I started at the Capitol when Bennett did in 2013, because anytime a majority swings, they have to hire a bunch of staff, and usually a bunch of young staff, to fill all the roles that they now have for new members. I actually found that KMRS KKOK job thanks to Barbara Burke. Shout out to communications, media, and Reddit professor Barbara Burke. I don't think there's a single, and I got my job at Tastefully Simple thanks to former communications director at Morris, Christine Mahoney. I don't think there's a single job I've gotten without some level of like random personal connection, and many of them have been rooted in or thanks to some form of connection through Morris, which has been huge. I didn't go to grad school. I have pretty similar feelings to Bennett, mostly because I think sometimes people feel pressured to go to grad school sort of just to do it. And I don't want anyone to think they have to do it sort of just to do it. There's a lot of jobs that require an advanced degree of some kind. Like my wife is a college academic advisor, and that field somehow just really requires a master's. So you just have to have one. If you're going to be an actual attorney, obviously law school is necessary. I would definitely say I've been a lobbyist since, well, not on and off since 2015, and I have a lefty liberal arts degree, and I like to think I'm capable of doing the job. But again, a lot of lobbyists have law degrees in part because they do legal work outside of the session, or they do really in-depth regulatory work. Whereas I do some regulatory work and regulatory tracking, but I don't write our regulatory comments. So an attorney actually writes those. So I'm hugely supportive of, like, if you have a job that requires it, I don't think you should have any regrets about pursuing something like that. And I also just think if you're not totally sure, don't feel pressured just because you think you'll need one to go get one. And my wife, who's also a Morris grad, went and got one, when she was 30 or whatever, because she knew she needed it for that job she was pivoting into. So I think different paths work for different people. I know a lot of poli-sci majors who left Morris and went to a PhD program at the U because a liberal arts, the way the poli-sci program and other programs at Morris work, they really do train you well for some of those grad programs, because they're almost grad style in the way it's small class sizes, lots of reading, lots of discussion, lots of papers. So I've known a lot of people who have gone in and become, have really enjoyed becoming a professor or getting a PhD, or, tons of people go to the Humphrey because it's just so well regarded for their master's in public policy. I know a ton of Morris grads who got their masters because they're also maybe more technical than the work I do too. So it's just it depends on what you want to get into.
All right. So after graduation, my first job post-grad was actually an internship with the Carlson companies. And I did get that connection through a Morris grad, Adam Eust, who I met at my senior year. He came to Morris for homecoming, and we were just at that homecoming mixer thing in Oyate, and we met. And then he forwarded that to me. So I worked in there. I think my title was like corporate affairs and responsible business intern. So I worked in their government affairs department. It was an awesome internship. I was basically again, these meeting agendas. I'm telling you, if you don't know how to make a meeting agenda, you gotta figure that out. Join a club that does it. But I took notes, wrote the agendas, and ended up planning their entire philanthropic campaign. And so there was a lot of event planning in there. Planned their field day, and it had a canoe race and a dunk tank and food trucks and all this stuff. And so little did I know that event planning experience was going to come super in handy when I started working for Senator Klobuchar. So yes, the process of meeting her at graduation and then working for her, that was in May. I started working for her in October. And also when I worked at Carlson for that 6 months, I saw her 3 times. And so that was a very good opportunity to be like, oh my God, yeah, remember me? And then being like, I just applied at your office. And then being like, I just interviewed with your office. So yeah, I think a lot of things serendipitously happened for me. So I started as a staff assistant with her in 2018, did casework for 2.5 years, an internship coordinator. So yeah, was a caseworker during the pandemic. So yeah, took calls and helped people with their personal issues. And that was difficult, but rewarding. And I would say also an impetus for when I started to consider going back to school, because I was like, I know, again, this vague feeling of wanting to do some public service, but I'm like, this casework thing, very akin to social work, was not necessarily something I wanted to do long term. I was like, I could do it now, but I can feel myself getting burnt out. And so I was like, what's next? And so I got promoted to be an outreach director, and that is very much being a liaison between her and nonprofits and the community and the public on all the topics in my portfolio. So I handled women's issues, energy and environment, public safety and law enforcement, Asian American communities, hunger, housing, FEMA. And so anything related to that, you got to talk to me first instead of Senator Klobuchar. And I learned a lot there. And at relatively the same time is when I started grad school. So I was thinking about it while I was a caseworker, did the application, didn't know I was going to get promoted to outreach at the time. And so I actually started school and switched jobs in the same month. And that was a lot, but it was also great because little did I know being an outreach director is all about networking, and going to school is a lot about networking. And so there was actually a lot of synergy between my job and school. And so I, ended up, again, figuring out what I wanted to do as I was in the program and kind of pivoting towards more environmental justice and housing. And I'm currently waiting on to hear back from our article that has been peer reviewed. So if that comes out, I'll let y'all know. But it's on the intersections of environmental justice and redlining and real estate value in the Twin Cities. And yes, so super excited about that. And so that is just one random thing that is kind of along the lines of how I got to my new job. And so, and I will say for Senator Klobuchar, a lot of what I did was plan her press conferences in those issue areas I mentioned. So, and that has come in handy for my new job. So now instead of planning press conferences for Senator Klobuchar, I plan them for, helping nonprofits that are involved with it come up with their talking points, and, coordinating with the state legislature mostly on, when they have experts come and testify in the hearings. If there are any of our grantees, I'll help prep them for things like that. So there's definitely that media relations component that I got from my experience with Senator Klobuchar's office. And then plus the subject area expertise I got from Morris and the Humphrey School. So yeah, I don't remember what else you asked, but I will say I agree with both Bennett and Matt about grad school. I didn't know I was going to go to grad school, and it took me a while to figure out. I actually applied originally when I started it, and I got to the point where it was like, why do you want to go to grad school? And I literally like couldn't answer the question. I was like, I can't just say I want to have a higher income bracket. So it took me like another year for me to of working for me to figure out like actually I'm passionate about the environment. I want to work in my biochem background, like and so I would say if you get to that point and you get to a prompt you can't answer, maybe it's the time isn't right. Like maybe you should think on it a little bit. And so and one more thing I'll say on grad school is I think people again feel pressured to go really quick and get their credentials like by the time they're 25 or like I'm going to have this. It's not as rewarding if you don't have experience to bring. So like you learn from your peers. It's not just sitting in class and being like taught by a professor. A lot of it's group work and collaborative. And so when you're in groups with people who've been in the workforce for 10, 15 years and have all this personal experience, you're going to learn so much more. And so I also wanted to be someone who could like be someone my peers felt like they were learning from. And so I will say that, getting work experience in your field is going to be just put you ahead. Like I would say the people who struggled more were maybe the people who came right out of undergrad and didn't have that kind of experience to share with everyone. So that'll be the last thing I say on grad school. But yeah, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Next question is, what are you working on currently? Describe your current position and what your day-to-day responsibilities are. What do you like and or dislike about your job, and how did you end up in this position? And I can repeat any of that, but you guys have been doing great. So
So currently in my government relations role, my lobbyist role, I'm at Fredrikson. So Fredrikson has a big law firm in downtown Minneapolis. They also have a government relations division that is located in St. Paul in an office that's like a block from the Capitol. It's much less smaller, much less shiny glass and metal in the office. Not nearly as impressive as the giant skyscraper they have in Minneapolis. But it's a really great team. It's like, 10 of us in our office. And so we're a law firm that generally I think that their tagline on the business card is like where business meets law or something like that. We mostly work with clients who have some sort of business interest that they're engaging when they need government relations help. They're engaging the legislature on something that either isn't working or that they'd like changed or could be better, for the business that they're endeavoring in. So uh, I have a bunch of clients that I'm like registered as a lobbyist for, some of which I never do anything for because someone else in our office on our team is like the lead person on. Most of the clients that I work with on like a day-to-day basis or that I'm like tracking things for week to week are somehow related to agriculture, energy, and lately the thing that the space that I end up in mostly is climate smart farming practices, soil health practices, incentivizing those practices so that the crops we're growing are specifically the crops we're growing that we're turning into fuel to try to move away from fossil fuel, that those crops are actually carbon neutral or carbon negative with the use of like CO2 pipelines. Let me just say, CO2 pipelines, super unpopular with Democratic politicians at the state legislature, and I'm like all over it. I would never have guessed that. On the things I don't like, it's talking to DFL state legislators about CO2 pipelines. That rant over. And a couple other cool things I'm working on right now. I've got a client that is represents like a consortium of can manufacturers. They really care about increasing our recycling rates, so that's much more feel good. And trying to find ways to incentivize the practice of getting your recyclable items actually into the curbside bin or actually into a stream where they won't be going to a landfill or an incinerator. And then I also work with like a company that's coming to Minnesota. We just had a groundbreaking for them last week down in Marshall. They're going to be turning corn syrup into renewable chemicals and like everyday household products, and replacing fossil fuels and the things that we need and the things we use every day. Fertilizer, concrete, you name it. And yeah, I like it. I like learning about the clients, about what their industries are. I like kind of getting an education on everything that they do, and then from like my political experience and my experience in campaigns, packaging all that information up and presenting what we need to legislators and laying it out for them in their own language, explaining to them why this would be a smart thing for the legislature to, because of, you know, the certain thing you care about that will help, or a certain type of endangered politician that will be helped by the issue we're working on, or something like that. Just as an example. And yeah, other than that, like, you know, there's always going to be things you don't like in jobs, so I don't want to like dwell on the things I don't like too much. But I will say, like, working at a big firm, I don't like entering time. When you work at a firm, you have to bill hourly. It sucks. If you want to make money, you have to like, I literally have to like mark down every 7.5 minutes of you know, something that I work on for people. What a waste of my life. But you have to do it if you want to get paid. I don't like that. Lawyers have it much worse though, because I will say I will get paid whether I enter the time on time or not. Lawyers will not get paid if they don't enter their time on time. You know, we charge by like a flat fee to our clients. So like they paid at the beginning of the year, they're paying, you know, quarterly or whatever. So I'll get paid no matter what. I just need to keep track of time for making sure that we're billing clients a reasonable amount at the end of the year. Lawyers have it worse than that. So that's one thing I don't like.
That's great. So inside baseball. For some context of how like Ruby, Bennett, and my experience would overlap. So for instance, Bennett is a contract lobbyist. The two lobbying jobs, the official lobbying jobs I've had, were in-house. And so what that, just to describe a little bit about that, it means I'm working for a sole entity and I'm their main point person. At my current job, we don't have additional contract lobbyists, but for instance, when I was at Fresh Energy, I was their director of government affairs and I had a contract lobbyist I could deploy. And while I was at Fresh Energy, I also did their strategic communications, which is not common. So being the lead lobbyist and doing strategic communications, I've never met anyone else that does both of those things. So for instance, Ruby mentioned working for multiple nonprofits. Before, if we didn't have a lot of capacity from a contractor like that, I used to have to do a lot of what Ruby did and draft talking points for lawmakers, for other orgs, blah, blah, blah. So just to give you a sense of sort of the overlap that can occur with some of those roles. So my current job as director of government affairs in this exact shop, they've never had a lobbyist before. So I sort of pitched them on having it. The company has 5 owners, and I used to work with one of the owners' wives at Fresh Energy. She was their grid expert who wrote like the interconnection rules for Minnesota. And he and his wife helped me install solar on our house. So that's how I met him. And I just knew they were growing and knew they didn't have a lobbyist, and basically cold pitched him. I was like, needed government affairs director. So I do, when we're in session, most of my job is being at the Capitol or working on things at the legislature. So for instance, last year when all the updates happened to community solar and other distributed solar, I was just neck deep in that bill. So there's a few things in that giant bill that I personally work to get as an industry priority. And then once it was an industry priority, work to get it into the final bill. And then this year, there's a small piece I've been working that I don't think made the House omnibus bill, but we'll see. Who knows? And then my secondary focus is on the Public Utilities Commission, which enforces rules created by the legislature. So I do a lot of tracking of like which regulatory dockets are existing, who's intervening, and then trying to do some back channel influence in a way that's not ex parte. So that's new for me, having to sort of work agencies. It's way different than the Capitol. You know, the Capitol's super bizarre and weird too, but every different space is weird and bizarre in its own way. And so that's been a new learning experience. I think what I like most is having to learn that new stuff. I'm someone, not to give a plug for the literal lifelong learner lines of a liberal arts school, but like I'm someone that has to be learning new stuff or else I get bored. So whether it's new subject area stuff, so even when I did communications, I was the type of comps person that over learned a topic because I had to be confident when I was writing about it. Other comps people just sort of like will puke out like good enough. And I was always way too nervous about that because I thought if I got it wrong, I would basically like destroy the work, like the effort. So I really like having to learn. I knew how solar policy worked, and now I have to learn how it works like for a company. I like that of even learning the same topic, but a different angle. You know, I work, Ruby mentioned work on like housing and zoning. In my personal time, I spend unspeakable amounts of energy on St. Paul and Ramsey County political campaigns. Basically, I coach candidates on how to talk about basically everything. And like I've built entire policy platforms for candidates because I just want them to be a little more substantial. I want to help coach them up because being a candidate sucks and being an elected official sucks. And so you want them to be able to do it in a better way. So honestly, anyone who's interested in like local campaign stuff, I'm sure Bennett would talk to you too, but bug me. I will do unspeakable amounts of effort to get you into like campaign related positions. Every campaign needs better people and more people. But I think I vomited enough of an answer on that.
All right, so for me, talking about Tunheim, so strategic communications firm, technically a small agency. It's woman owned. There's about 25 employees, and Kathy Tunheim's the CEO, and she is a tour de force. So if you don't know who she is, Google her, because she's pretty much helped build up a PR pillar in the Twin Cities. And so my role, senior account strategist. So I guess I'll zoom out. The goal of our firm is to help our clients be understood by those who are essential to their success. So we are basically there to help. When you think of like basic PR, it's like, what do you need your target audience to know about you? Is it just to like visibility? Do they not know you exist, or do they know you exist but they don't know what you do? So like trying to just get that messaging out there. So crafting the messaging itself, but then also all of these digital tactics. And so I'll just talk really briefly about that because I'm not the digital person, but I think what we do is mind-blowing, and I'm just learning so much about digital marketing nowadays, and it's insane. But the specificity of which we can geo-target specific places or target specific types of people on social media. But for example, so one of my clients is Energy Foundation, which is a national foundation. We have a state energy foundation table, and so I work with all of our grantees on different projects, and one of them is for getting this Packaging and Waste Cost Reduction Act passed. And so that is trying to get all companies to have their packaging be recyclable or compostable by 2033. And so on the day we knew that companies were sending lobbyists to the Capitol to secretly lobby against this bill, we geo-targeted the Capitol with an open letter to producers on why they should support this. And, we could see how many clicks it gets. And so yeah, just like this overall strategic strategy, and how are we going to get the people we need to see the messages that we want them to see. So this is still very new to me. Like I didn't know this job existed a year ago. So and so I'll talk a little bit more about different types of projects I'm on. So within Energy Foundation, I'm on 5 different scopes of work, and my favorite is climate and democracy. So I'm the field coordinator for a Midwest cohort across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan. And so our goal is to get out the vote for climate justice. And so we are working on message testing with, Native communities, like urban BIPOC communities, trying to figure out like what's motivating people to vote on climate and how do we, get that out there. So that's one project. I have another one that's focused on shutting down the Herc trash burner in downtown Minneapolis. So, and that's weaved into our Packaging and Waste Reduction Act work. And so there's a lot of that. I work with the Minnesota Homeownership Center on a foundational Black American tax down payment assistance program. And so that super related to the work I did at the Humphrey School. We're working with Minsure on getting their insulin cost, like there's, if you don't know, you can get insulin for $30 if you fill out a form. And so I'm trying to figure out how to tell everyone in Minnesota that you can get insulin for $30 if you fill out a form. So I'm on that team. And then last, we have this really cool new client called North Star Policy Action. And they are a small think tank, left-leaning, labor-funded think tank. And they are working on a lot of clean energy stuff. So they wrote a report on clean energy permitting reform, which we're trying to, get past. They wrote a couple other reports that have been the foundation for legislation that's been proposed this year. So, the intersection of labor and energy, how do we push for the energy transition without leaving workers behind? And so many different angles that, can be taken within sustainability and energy space. And yeah, a lot of just different ways I can pitch in. So for some clients, I write press releases. For other clients, I write talking points. For other clients, I just advise them. So yeah, it's a lot of something new every day, which is what I need in a job. So yeah, that's all.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Our last question is, what would you tell your college self if you could go back in time? What is something you want current UMN more students to interested in sustainability careers to know?
I mean, I would tell my college self so many things. You don't have enough time to sit here all night for it, but I think as it relates to this conversation, I would encourage myself, while I was a student, I would encourage myself to find a way to fit in more of those internship experiences, especially like during your summer, or like if you can find a way to like be in an elected's office for a couple weeks in the fall, or uh you know study somewhere abroad if you're interested in international relations stuff, things like that. I would encourage myself to it takes a lot of planning and effort to do that, but I would encourage myself to do the planning and effort to figure out how to make that work, to try to get a couple more of those experiences and to winnow down the things that you're actually interested in and that you want to pursue once you graduate. As it relates to like as you're like leaving and heading out into your career, I would tell my college self, like, and some people don't have student loans. That's great. Good for you. Pat yourself on the back and get the hell out of here. But for people who do have student loans, I would tell myself, figure out a way, explore all your options for like how you can make that minimum payment or whatever, and don't like twist yourself into knots thinking about like, oh my God, I've got this like giant like bill I need to pay, and that's all I can think about every day at work when I'm, in my entry level job, only making, I don't know what entry level people make now, but I was making $29,000 a year when I started, which, by the way, when you're living in Minneapolis, not a lot of money. So I would tell myself like, yeah, you'll be stressed out, but you'll get through it. Figure out how to make, a little bit of an impact, but you're going to have like years of working experience and not to worry about that. So do a job that you are interested in, that you love, that you feel like you can really, that completes a part of like what you feel like you're missing in your life. Don't do something just because it pays a lot of money. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo the part about I would, to be honest, it's why I take part in anything like this, like having current students be able to talk to alums. I like the lengths I would go to do like unpaid help for Morris people is like, I haven't found the limit yet. Like our professors and staff back then did a good job too, but the more, especially in a place like Morris, where you learn so much of the liberal arts piece and the academic piece and the intellectual piece, the more you can add hands-on stuff here and there is so helpful. And so I would just say, really, really be shameless in who you bug. You know, like one of the people on this meeting DM messaged me in the Zoom and said, "Hey, could I get your email or cell, like, to reach out to you?" I was like, "Yes." And I gave it to him, and they texted me like literally while this is going on. And I would totally suggest being that shameless, like, because the thing is, all of us are going to want to support you anyway. And then even on top of that, it's just helpful to have those conversations. Even if I don't like have some magical job to give someone, it's helpful to have the conversation just for whatever it's worth. So that's what I would tell folks, because I think it's just hard being a slightly smaller school and being slightly more rural. Like, you know, Roger and I have talked over like random moments in time where it's like, man, wouldn't it be great if we could have a set like legislative internship somehow, some way? And those things are just really tough to like invent from scratch. But like, you know, if kids go to McAllister, they're 4 miles from the state capitol. You know, they're 6 miles from downtown Minneapolis. And I would ride Morris over any of these absurd like private liberal arts schools in Minnesota, but that is one of the downsides of geography. And so over the summer, if you can do a semester, I would just say be creative, but also just bug all of us, because I have yet to find like a Morris alum that is not like super militantly in favor of helping more students. Like, we're too small of a group to not be that way. So I've found everyone to be receptive for sure.
All right, I'll make this quick just in case anyone has questions, and I'm also happy to stay on a little later if people have questions. But for what I would tell my past self, I would say I used to stress a lot about like specific classes to take. I'm like, oh my God, if I don't take this class, then I won't know this stuff and my life will be over. I don't remember what classes I took. So I would say take what you're interested in, because that might lead you to something else. I would say I wish I took some more like computer science, but like whatever, that's beside the point. And then in terms of what I would like people interested in sustainability to know, I think based off like what you've heard from the three of us, there's so many angles that sustainability can take. You know, you could be in the public affairs space, you could be like government relations, you could be like, there's so many things. You could be in industry, you could be in government, you could be a nonprofit. Like, there's so many ways. So I would say, I was going to echo what Matt said. Leverage your Morris network. I don't know if you've heard the term Morris Mafia, maybe Morris Cabal, but like we have infiltrated government. And so, you know, state government, federal government, there's Morris people everywhere. If you don't know who Alana Peterson is, Google her. She's a mover and shaker from Morris. Also, former biology professor, Pete Wyckoff is now the deputy commissioner of commerce, and he's basically going to be in charge of rolling out all the IRA funding. He basically wrote the IRA when he worked for Tina Smith. So there's a lot of powerful Morris people out there behind the scenes doing the work. And echoing what Matt said, anytime I get an invite from Morris to do something, happy to do it, happy to do informational interviews. But a lot of us got our start from a Morris connection, and we'd love to be that Morris connection for you too. So yes, reach out, don't be shy. And unsolicited advice, but I've been doing this since I got my first job. Make a spreadsheet of all the business cards you get and put their information in it, and then add a column for how and when you met, because I've used that so many times. I'm like, hello, we met at this thing in 2022. And then you can ask them for this stuff, and they're like, ah, yes, I pretend to remember you, but thank you for reaching out. And so then you don't have to keep all these stupid business cards that you're never going to look at again. And that is my unsolicited advice for how to do networking good.
And for those less organized than Ruby and chaotic like Bennett and I, just cold message us and no spreadsheet necessary, but the spreadsheet sounds good.
And
Yes,
for those who don't know what a business card is, it's a little piece of cardboard that you put your email and phone number on and your job title that people used to use in the olden days to share with other folks.
Yeah.
But
So they
they're
might
still very old.
Yeah, add people on LinkedIn, send LinkedIn messages. Those are good too.
And pretending he doesn't have business cards, just
I have a whole drawer full of business cards that I always forget to put in my pocket when I'm going to an event where I would actually use them. So they keep me warm at night.
Thank you everyone so much for the great advice. It's so good to hear from you, and I just want to say thank you for being here and speaking to us, and yeah, sharing everything with us. You guys are a great group. We are a little past 7. Normally we do questions, so if you guys want to stay, do not feel obligated at all. But if you would like to stay and if we have questions, we can definitely do that.
Totally cool, Stan.
Awesome.
Especially
Any
because
questions?
me going long is why this went so long.
Yeah, same.
Any questions from our students? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat.
I don't count as a student anymore, but can I ask a question anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, I'm fascinated, what is a CO2 pipeline?
It is something incentivized by the Inflation Reduction Act, a tax credit that will capture carbon dioxide emitted from biofuel refineries and put it in a pipeline and send it to a saline aquifer where it will be permanently mineralized underground in North Dakota. Sounds futuristic, and it might stay that way if it never gets permitted and approved. We'll find out. TBD. Stay tuned for updates.
I just learned what carbon sequestration was in grad school. Like I've heard the term since in grad school. I've heard it since high school, but I didn't know what it meant. And I was like, wait, we're just putting it in pipes and holding it underground. Like I was so confused. Like,
Yes, the goal will be that once the CO2 goes into this saline aquifer, which is like thousands and thousands of feet underground, the chemistry of the water will react with CO2, cause it to mineralize, and then just kind of become like this mineralized extra part of what's underground. So yeah. Great to see you too somehow.
yes, you too.
Any other questions?
Yeah, out of curiosity, what I know that none of you, at least from what I'm recalling, have had any direct working experience with a government agency. Are there any tips that you could impart that might help with someone who's looking for a job at I don't know, Department of Energy, Department of State, maybe?
Yeah, I would. Well, other people might have advice too. To be honest with you, I for those government jobs, one thing I would say is certain agencies use like a computerized screening tool where it's truly just based on like really firm, like, do you meet X, Y, and Z? So I would say at times you're gonna have to be really cognizant of that, because in other spaces it's really based on like the total package of, like, in other even political spaces, like government spaces, but they're political hires, there's a more holistic look at the person. And people have started removing education requirements and removing this to try and make it more comprehensive. At times those agency jobs or regulatory jobs can sometimes screen in a much more traditional way. So I would just say make sure you're cognizant of, it says 7 years experience, are you hitting 7 years, or like 3 years or 1 year, whatever. Because I've heard stories like that where people are trying to get in, and even corporate settings, to be honest, some of them still use those screening tools where it's really programmed. Otherwise I would give the same advice as any other field, which is it's always really helpful if you can find some level of connection, even if technically the person isn't on the hiring team. If you can find someone who will just like put in, even like, hey, met this person, they didn't seem terrible, like truly that level of a good word sometimes can get your resume looked at. Of if someone meets you and they can just say like, listen, I can't vouch in depth for this person, but I did meet them and we spoke for 14 minutes and they didn't seem completely bizarre, or whatever. So I would say always still make those attempts if you have them, but otherwise it's the structured thing I've heard more of those stories about, or that I've personally experienced.
Yeah, I'll just add, if you can get in the federal government in any capacity, I think like, interning at Amy's office is still going to be a good first step to open some sort of doors, get some sort of connections. And I feel like the bureaucracy, surprisingly, is so bureaucratic that like they do a lot of the entry level hiring, promote from within. And so you kind of got to get in, at the ground level and work your way up. So one thing I will mention, which I applied for this and I didn't get it, but it's okay. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM, they have this Presidential Management Fellowship. You do need an advanced degree to apply, so this could be down the road. But this is basically the pipeline to become someone who runs a federal agency. So back when I was in grad school thinking maybe I want to, run FEMA someday or be like, how do people become the deputy undersecretary of whatever, right? This is like the pipeline that no one knows about. So if you want to look into the Presidential Management Fellows, or maybe you could like search that on LinkedIn and connect with someone in an agency that did that. Like those are the types of people like us that love to talk to people. So yeah, I would say just do some research on internships. I would say is probably the best way to get your foot in there.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, like working in the politics and government space, is that there's kind of like two trajectories. Like in super political jobs, I find that it's all about like who you know and who you're making connections with and who has a good impression of you. So, I mean, that can go south 1,000 different ways. But generally, if you're working hard, you present yourself well, you do the work, and you're honest, like that's going to carry you a long way in that field. I find that in government jobs that are more like nonpartisan agency jobs or focused on a specific issue or the mechanics of a certain agency, they tend to focus a lot more on like the job experience and credentials that you bring. So in jobs like that, sometimes like, if they say you need a master's degree in public policy or a master's degree in administration or something like that, sometimes they're much more serious about that. And, that's the requirement, or you need to be like an expert in some sort of field. So it's a little bit less about who you know per se, but yeah.
And to put a button on that, I regularly, when people are asking me about a government job, like at City Hall or a different agency, if they're trying to pick my brain, smart people, and I don't even always remember to ask this question, but smart people will ask, is this a political hire or like a union hire or like an agency hire? And the difference is, even though there might still be an entirely formal process, a political hire technically is just whatever the political person decides. Like they might still build a process, but like technically, if it's appointed by the city council member or the governor, like technically they can kind of do whatever they want. And then the more like union driven or agency driven one. So it's smart when you're doing those conversations to say like, is this a political hire or not, is basically the question.
Yeah, and when a job position is created with someone in mind before the position is created, like, like let's say the governor wants to hire their like liaison for creating rainbows in the sky or something, they've got a person in mind that they want to do that job for them, and they're creating the process so that they can say they went through the process. So like if you wanted to be the chief ambassador of rainbows in the sky, don't be too dejected or broken down or like beat yourself up if you don't get the job, because some jobs in government, like there was a plan for who was going to have that job and it's totally outside of your control. So yeah.
Any last questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, can I ask kind of a loaded question? Do you ever feel like I'm really interested in policy, and this is my big fear going into anything political is, do you ever feel like you're compromising like your own moral integrity in your field? Do you ever feel like you're gonna like do something that you don't even agree with as a person? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I had a job when I left the Capitol. I like my wife and I, who I met at Morris, had moved a couple times, and at least one of those was because of like my job change. And anyone who has to like move in a relationship will tell you the dynamics of like I was creating the reason why she had to get a new job. Like I was basically forcing her to, we were moving, and so then she had to hunt for a new job. and we were in the Twin Cities, and we just were not making enough money because I had made her move and she was on a job hunt, and I felt a lot of pressure to get a job, and I didn't do my due diligence. And so I left the capital to work for a place that like plenty of you might be happy working for, but the Rural Electric Cooperative. So for folks who know the utility space in Minnesota, they're the most conservative and most oppositional to clean energy in the state, not just politically, but also just operationally. And so culturally, it was sort of a bizarre fit. There was also like 10 other dynamics at play at that office that I'm happy to tell you at a alumni happy hour or something. But that actually was a very big moment for me, because when I was in that job for about 3 months or a few months, I actually realized I couldn't necessarily handle working a job that was at least somewhat substantially in conflict with my values, and not in like any it's not like I was literally working for a coal plant, but it's not like that far from like working for a coal plant when you work for the co-op.
One step away.
So I did have that situation where I was just in my head. I got the job in June, and I was their lobbyist, their junior lobbyist. And all I kept thinking about is like, the session starts in January. And all I could think about every single day is, because the industry companies like that hire Democrats for a reason. They hire you because they know you can go talk to Democratic lawmakers with a straight face. And all I kept thinking about is like, will I be able to go into Melissa Hortman's office and say this? Will I be able to go into Ryan Winkler's office and say this? Will I be able to do it and not feel shame and whatever? Like, can I pull off this meeting? Like, can I go in? Because to be honest with you, I did multiple DC trips, and we happened to be working issues that I could do. Like, they were talking about their water heater program, which is awesome. It's a demand response program that's like nation leading. And I had no problem doing that meeting. I crushed it. My twin brother worked for a congressman at the time. I did that meeting. They enjoyed the hell out of the comedy of that. But all I kept thinking is like, will I be able to do these meetings and not like lose my mind? And I basically decided I couldn't. And so then I was on the job hunt again. So I do think it's sort of just know where your boundary is. Like, even being a contract lobbyist, when Bennett had to decide to be a contract lobbyist, and he's interviewing and he's talking to them, he would ask them like, what's my client mix going to be like? And they would be like, okay, here are the 2 to 5 that you'll lead on. Here are the 5 to 10 that you'll be our backup on. And he has to decide like, okay, no contract lobbyist has a perfect list. Like, nobody. Like, there's like 2 in the list that has I can think of like 3 people I know who have a fully white hat, like sunshine and rainbows list that they have no conflict with. So it's basically a degree of gray. So what you decide is like, if I represent, Rochester Public Utilities, they're kind of backward thinking, but actually they do have 100% clean energy goal. And you do this like this balancing act of, to be honest with you, being a contract lobbyist a lot of times too, or working for some entity, also just means you might be working stuff you're not like super passionate about, but it's not always like egregious anti-value stuff. It's more like, can I find a way to be interested in watershed districts? Can I find a way to be interested in golf course associations? Like, can I find a way to be interested in non-public college athletic facilities, like random associations? But it is just a thing you have to grapple with, because to be honest with you, it's different for every person of like where the temperature is. And then if you just decide like, well, 9 of these clients are slam dunk awesome causes, and I have one that I'm not great about, it's like, well, then the feeling is different than if you're in-house and everything they do is sort of weird, so it's kind of just, I think it's, everyone has to decide, but it's very real. It's very real.
And I was very clear when I was interviewing for the job I'm in now, that if there was some client that I absolutely could not stomach ever lifting a finger to help them do something, that I would have the ability to, let someone else on the team work on that project, because I absolutely could not. And I didn't know if I would ever, like get to use that little veto power. But I definitely did, like we get people coming looking to use us to advocate on their behalf all the time. And, the email was floated around the office, like, do you want to, should we take this contract? Would you work on that? And I said, over my dead body. And and they were like, okay, we'll put that on someone else's list. You won't work on that. So I'm very fortunate, and I was really clear with them up front that I was willing to like go outside of my comfort zone on a lot of things, but I didn't want to advocate on behalf of something that I thought was like wrong or bad. Other people have like a way higher threshold for that too. So, you know, like everybody's a little different when it comes to that, but I was really clear up front with that. I don't know if Ruby has anything to say about that, but
Yeah, I'll just be real quick and say, so I worked for a moderate Democrat, and I would probably consider myself more of a progressive. And so I wouldn't say she did anything against my beliefs, but I would say she maybe didn't go as far as I would have gone if I were senator, right? And so I think the important thing that my team reminded me is it's important that you are here because you are pushing the needle, you know, in your capacity and what you have control over. And, you know, the rooms you're in, they should hear your voice. And so even though you might not agree necessarily with everything going on, the fact that you're there, you know, is important. And so I think that's kind of how I accepted the fact that, you know, when she wouldn't comment on certain things or like, you know, didn't whatever, you know, just to like be like, but it's important that like the people I talk to see me, you know, and talk to me. And, you know, so that is kind of how I dealt with that. And then now on the consulting side, I think I'm lucky that Tunheim's pretty progressive. And so a lot of our clients, I haven't had this issue, but they have told me that if I ever want to refuse to work on something, I can just refuse to work on it. And so that is something that is good in the, you know, agency life that not necessarily would be the same, wouldn't hold true in, you know, the government necessarily. So I think the harder part for me was having to just censor myself and not, you know, you can't really post stuff on social media when you work for a senator. So now that I don't, I am just, you know, check out my Instagram story, Free Palestine. So, you know, so that's kind of like the other distinction too. It's just like, can you express your own opinions freely? If not, you know, just if that's important to you, maybe don't take a job that makes it so that you can't have like your own presence online or your own opinions. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we should wrap it up here, but I really appreciate all your thoughts and advice you shared today. So, yeah, I hope you all have a great evening. See you later.
nice to meet you all. I'm happy to see you all.
Great to see you all.
Yep. Bye, Roger. Bye, Sung Ho. Bye, Troy.
Mhm.